All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. This is the August 23rd meeting of the Board of Waterworks Trustees. We have a consent agenda that includes the minutes of July 26, 2022 Board of Waterworks Trustees meeting, the minutes for the August 2nd, 2022 Planning Committee meeting, the minutes for the August 9th, 2022 Finance and Audit Committee meeting, financial statements, list of payments for July 2022, summary of CEO approved expenditures in excess of $20,000, and the establishment of our next meeting date as September 27th, 2022. Is there a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
And this motion in a second. Any comments or questions or anything to discuss, Ted?
Nothing to pull out.
Any comments or questions for anyone on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda, say aye.
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 Diane's online. She says aye. It's that motion, and so that's unanimous. So that motion passes. We have a moment here for public comment. I'm not sure I've seen anybody here from the public, but this is a moment to address us on any topic you wish, and also a time to talk about regional governance. So why don't you give us an update on regional governance, Ted, and then I'll see if anybody can say.
Yes, Graham, the three topics under discussion right now in regional governance, the 2080 agreement, the operating agreement, the operating contract, and the expansion of Saylorville. And all three of those are still in process. We did receive some initial comments from Urbandale and West Des Moines. We're still waiting to receive their comments, their final comments on the agreement. We are continue to anticipate comments from bond counsel on the financial aspects that are contained in the agreement. So
Recording in progress.
Sorry.
that's where we are with that. And
There we go.
the operating agreement, the agreement that would be entered into between the producers and Central Iowa Waterworks ultimately has been drafted and shared with West Des Moines. They've reviewed it, and the attorneys Rick Malm and Eve Beatty are in some discussion or planning for a discussion about in terms of that operating agreement. And then we have sent a letter to all the communities recommending an allocation methodology for the capacity that's going to be developed in the Saylorville Water Treatment Plant, asking for their concurrence with that allocation methodology and the distribution of costs for that proposed project. And we're waiting to hear back from entities on that. So we're waiting for feedback on a number of areas.
Anything else on regional governance?
Are there deadlines? That feedback.
You know, we had originally asked for comments on the agreement in May. So now we're in August. Most recently, Graham and I have visited about trying to put together a timeline to establish some deadlines so we can move the process forward. But in some instances related to specifically the feedback from legal counsel on the bonding, we're
Sure.
to set deadlines or timelines that we certainly are hopeful that we are going to have an agreement that's final draft form by the end of the year. So that's what we're planning to share is here's our target, your feedback by this time. So
The new information about the Saylorville treatment plant, though, do you anticipate you can receive comments back on that sooner than some of these other items, though?
we're hoping to, because we want to move forward with
Right.
issuing a request for proposals on design of the plant. And we had put a date by which we would like to report back from the communities. We did hear back from about half we didn't. So we have reached out to that. I'm going to call them the significant players who we think are likely to participate. We've reached out to them again and asked for their feedback on that. And that's where we are. We really need to know that there's a group of people planning to participate forward, but holding off on that. Till we hear from them to comfortable.
Diane, you were the one to ask the question, I know, of Jody and John. Did you want to give an update on the timing of the financial analysis, what we learned? Or I sure will, I'm in the room. We did bring this up on timeline, and unfortunately, some of the financial analysis that needs to be done for Urbandale and West Point, they anticipate not having that back until September. They too were disappointed that it would be sooner, but I mean, just to be realistic, that's when they expect to have. This way I understood John.
I'm sorry, Sue, I had trouble unmuting, but you're talking about the analysis with relative to the Sailor bill?
No, just the overall analysis that they were doing on some additional pieces with on the 28E is what I had understood.
Hmm,
I think that's the timeline that they're hoping for from bond council.
Yes,
oh, okay, okay.
So you get the sense that, I'm thinking about the kind of complexity of this agreement, and various issues in play. You get the sense that the communities in the region, particularly some smaller communities, have the resources to properly analyze this. I think I recall that there are a lot of working with specific financial consultants are getting the feedback they need. Can you speak to that at all, or are the other communities getting the input they need?
I think I can speak to that, Joel. The majority of the communities in the metro use PFM for their financial consulting. And a lot of them have retained PFM to do the analysis and walk them through and help them understand what it means from a financial perspective for them in terms of their rates. And they look at the initial financial true up and then add on the costs associated with paying for the expansion. You know, PFM is working on all that. They can't do them all at the same time. And so they're kind of working through them. And I think that they've been able to get through that for most of the larger players, but I know that they've recently been working with Grimes and Altoona, from what I hear. I'm trying to help them understand. Some of the other communities, Bondurant stands out in my mind. You know, they're considering other options. They might want to do something different entirely. And that's an analysis that's going to take some time. They've responded to us and said, basically, we're going to do this analysis and it's going to be something we do in the fourth quarter and we'll let you know. I think if we get to critical mass and we start making decisions, that timeline may or may not work. They have to make a decision before their analysis is done, but I think most of them are getting the feedback that they need. A couple that I frankly I'm not clear on where they're at in their analysis or why we haven't heard back from them include Ankeny. And Ankeny's been at the table since the beginning. They're very supportive. They're very interested. They provided comments, but we've yet to hear from them on their participation in Sailor bill. As recently as earlier this week, we sent another email just asking to provide an update on. I think they might have that feedback, but I certainly believe that they have the resources and are getting the attention they need. It's not clear to me what point they're at in the decision-making process, but we haven't heard from them. Thank you.
I mean, it is important. I think that the plan that Ted has laid out that, you know, over the next couple of weeks and more importantly, during the month of September, we at Moines Waterworks work overtime to outline what the schedule is, so people know when feedback is. And to your point, Joel, if they need help and assistance, that we can help them find it. There are other places. I met with John Norris in Polk County this morning. You know, while they're not exactly a player in this, they're very interested in making it happen. And they would be a resource for communities too. But I appreciate what Ted's doing and laying out a calendar, communicating and over communicating sometimes of what deadlines are out there and why it's important that we work really hard in September to get this thing done by the end of the year. So, and I think as Ted, and you know this, but as you work on this, if there's anything that we as board members can do, to help communicate or participate in meetings or make phone calls, I know all of us are willing to do that. Appreciate that. All right, anything else on regional governance? Any other topics that people would like to discuss? All right, we will move into our agenda. Our first agenda item is item 3A. Subject here is not to exceed $110,000 state revolving fund planning and design loan for Polk County Pump Station ASR resolution fixing date for a meeting on the proposition to issue. That's the most awkward title I've ever read in my life.
Yeah, I'm gonna blame the lawyers.
It's always the lawyers, John. It is. So why don't you explain this to me, to address Ted, and then we have a roll call vote on this one.
Certainly, Graham. We, as the board knows, have had an additional aquifer storage and recovery well in our long-range plan for some time. It's also in the 5-year CIP that the board recently approved. What we're here to do today is set the date for a public hearing at which we would hear from the public and then get permission from the board to get a loan from SRF, basically. And this is a $1,110,000 loan. It's a design loan. It's a loan that we will not have to make payments on until after we've borrowed the money and built the facility and completed the project. But they have a provision there for no interest design loans, which is outlined in the memo. But this is purely passing a resolution to set the date. Public hearing is the date of the next board. That's what we're doing here today.
So I am seeking a motion and a roll call vote to adopt the resolution fixing date for a meeting on the proposition to authorize a loan and disbursement agreement and the issuance of notes to evidence the obligation of the water utility thereunder. So that's the motion I'm seeking. Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
And a second.
Second,
Diane, thank you. Any comments or questions on this resolution?
Just for clarification of the minutes, will be adopted, should that you vote for it, you'll be adopting the resolution that's attached to the board sheet following. So Graham doesn't have to read the entirety of the 3-page resolution.
Which I appreciate. All right, any comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll have Michelle record a vote.
Ashburn,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Moines.
yes,
All right, item 3B is acceptance of gallery valve chamber structures reconstruction. Ted, I'll have you explain this one.
Graham, the board is all aware of our infiltration gallery. The reason that Waterworks Park exists, our first and best source. And you're also, I'm sure, all familiar with the structures that line the gallery, the manhole structures that have been there literally for decades in some disrepair. And this project was a project to rehabilitate a number of those gallery manhole structures. You can see the list there of which structures are rehabilitated. And there's a map on the following page. The work is complete. Those manhole structures were demolished to several feet below grade and then reconstructed with new cast in place concrete and architectural finish on the outside and safety railings and access points that make them much more functional than they were before, and also will extend the life of those facilities for another 100 years or so. There were a few change orders related to some additional work that was discovered as part of the demolition and reconstruction, most notably adjacent to the very last manhole, gallery manhole in the back of the park. There was a structure discovered underground. We didn't know it was there, that had to be demolished or removed before we could do our work. So whenever we dig in the ground, find things we don't expect, but there,
Something that we put in years and years ago.
yeah, I believe so. Kyle, do you have any more details on that?
We did not figure out what. Isn't that interesting?
No longer used, demolished to just below grade. You had to take it out.
Was it concrete? That you had to take out? Isn't that fascinating?
Not on any of our historic drawings or yard maps. It's probably on a historic drawing somewhere. But we had to remove it to do our work. I do want to point out that I think that the contractor did a great job and the structures look amazing.
They do look
There used to be kind of cracked and deteriorating concrete weeds going out of the roof, and now they're much better shape. And look great. So final contract price was to their $478,000. We're looking for the board's acceptance of that project so that the warranty can get.
So I'm looking for a motion to accept the gallery valve chamber structures reconstruction contract completed by Synergy Contracting LLC in the amount of $478,526.42. Is there a motion to that effect? And a second? Second. Motion, a second. Any comments or questions on item 3B?
Pretty good value if you're saying it's going to last 100 years. We had 488,000 for 100 years.
Right.
Gallery is the best investment Des Moines Waterworks has ever made.
You're correct.
By
about that.
far.
Yeah, and it's almost 100 years old now. Started in the 30s.
I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah. It's either long after I go. It's just.
All right, any other comments or questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes. Moving to item 3C, acceptance of the Southeast Polk Northeast Morgan Drive meter vault. Ted?
Graham, the board will remember that there was an area in northeastern Polk County that we're having trouble serving through the southeast Polk system, and we determined that it would be more effective to actually serve that area through the Bondurant system. We entered into a wheeling agreement whereby water that flowed into Bondurant from our system would flow back out through a meter pit and serve a number of new customers, and actually open some area in that part of the county up for development. This project was the actual construction of that meter vault, or the structure that the meter actually sits in. The construction is complete. There were a couple of minor changes on this project amounting to less than $3,000 total. But the contract is complete and ready to accept about $130,000.
So I'm looking for a motion to accept the Southeast Polk Northeast Morgan Drive meter vault contract completed by Synergy Contracting LLC in the amount of $188,987.50. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
And a second from Sue. Any comments or questions on this? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed. And so item 3C passes. Moving us to item 3D, request authorization to purchase materials for the 2022 Treatment Basin 1 rechaining project. Ted?
Graham, this is basin rechaining is something that we do on a regular basis. We have one of these basins to rechain about every year. We have 6 basins at the Food Drive plant. They're an important part of the treatment process, but they have a lot of wear parts. And so we go into one of the basins. We go into every basin in the wintertime to clean it. Usually we also do some pretty extensive rehabilitation of the basin. This time, we're also going to replace the water piping. There's 4-inch diameter piping in the basin that is used to deliver the water that services the fire hoses that the staff literally uses to hose out those basins. And that piping has been there since original construction of the basin in the 1940s. Pipe itself is somewhat aged, but also the supports and the mounts that attach it to the wall are corroding, starting to fail. So we need to get that replaced. And we don't want it to come apart and be like a main break underwater. Bad situation. So what we're proposing to do here is actually purchase those materials in advance. That piping material to replace the water piping that actually is inside the basin. You purchase that material in advance and then provide it to the contractor who will, next month, will bring bids back for the installation of this piping and the repair, the rehab of the basin. This is just for the materials for that piping to provide to the contractor.
So I'm seeking a motion to authorize staff to purchase materials from Core and Maine in the amount of $117,209.50 for the replacement of water system piping for treatment basin number 1. Is there a motion to that effect? And a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions on item 3D? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 And those opposed, and that motion passes. Which we've sped through our agenda items, moving us into our information items. Board committee reports, planning committee.
Yes, so we met and we had a wonderful presentation on well rehabilitation, which I truly appreciate, kind of walking through the basics of that and learning just how much doing our maintenance of those wells can open up and improve the amount of access to water that we can get through that. But Diane, I don't know if you have anything else you would like to share about that meeting?
Only that we got to see some really good video.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know, we have a recording of it, right? If anybody wants to see actually how that happens
Before and after.
Yep, before and after.
Audio is traditionally posted to the website, but I put the
I don't see it. Yeah, that'd be great.
It was really, I appreciate all of Vern's presentations.
Latent teacher tendencies.
Yes,
Does a nice job of explaining that. And all those things.
Anything else?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right. Joel, what about finance and audit?
Yes, we received a really nice and informative presentation from Michelle Hall, your financial update. Which good news was, if I recall correct, pumpage was up over budget. We discussed in the meeting, and we talked to Ted about thinking about how we develop our projections. It's been 6 or 7 years in a row where our projections, actual pumpage had been over projections, which is good news for the utility. But my thinking is that we ensure that our projections are accurate, not shorting our ratepayers. And so, I asked him to think about the ways to, build into our projections population growth or some other measure that takes into account growth of the region. So it was a really good discussion.
And if I might, Joel,
Please.
just as a follow-up to your request, we've already done some looking. I know Amy has done some outreach to some of the other utilities our size and just asked them what they do. And we got some interesting feedback from Water One, so Amy in Johnson County, Kansas. They have a process that we're going to look at. It does take into consideration population, if you will, but also the number of commercial businesses and industrial businesses. Their terminology is a little different than ours, but they had residential 1, which is single family, and residential 2, which is multifamily. And they had commercial 1, commercial 2, small commercial and large commercial, and they do some estimating based on that and some tracking based on that. So we're going to look at a more scientific way than projecting based on historical usage and see what it comes up with and how it compares to what we came up with our historical projection. It likely won't influence what we do next month, but it very likely will influence what we do going forward. And at least we'll have that data that we can compare to what you saw at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting and see if it's going to be valuable. So,
Great. I appreciate you taking a look at that. I thought it's, probably challenging, not easy to just add in population growth, there's all kinds of factors, types of water users. You discussed before, energy efficient appliances and how much of an effect those may have on our usage. So I appreciate it. It's not gonna be easy to factor some of these things in. But worth taking a look. Agreed.
As I think all of you know, the Stowe Foundation, through some of its own funding over the summer, but also thanks in part to a grant from the Greater Des Moines Community Foundation, started a research project. Summer's phase was, we had a couple of interns who were really great that came in and spent the summer visiting with organizations throughout the community that would be interested in this broad concept of a environmental and education hub that could be based in Waterworks Park, and trying to gauge interest and what some of the roles could be in that park. And they presented a preliminary report in person before they left for the summer up at Lakeside Labs, who's a partner in the study, and really interesting information that came out of that. So the next phase that you'll see is there'll be a final report that's issued the first part of October, where we'll pull together again all of those partners to receive the report and talk about next steps. It seems that the next step, logical next step, would be to start developing a strategic plan of what an education hub and environmental hub could look like, how it might be managed. But we need to discuss a little bit about how do we get there. I envision there probably would be some sort of a, focus group roundtable discussion, facilitated with those players possibly over the winter, so that we could have some sort of a plan of that second phase of the research, if you will, that the Stowe Foundation Foundation would fund next summer. Initially, the thought was that maybe we bring in a second round of interns, this time maybe being graduate interns, to look at the finance and education pieces of it. And maybe that's the right case, but there is another path that we could explore too, and that is maybe hiring consultants or some other group or university or somebody to actually begin to develop the strategic plan. But that's the thing that I think we have to get the final report in October, have the focus groups and continue the discussions over the winter, decide, what the best way is to move forward over, the next few months.
So the intern report then is not available until October, but they're done.
They're done. Here's what, and yes, and here's why. That we met with Lakeside Labs, and the real missing piece is, if you will, it's the Lakeside Labs piece. Lakeside Labs needs to make some decisions about whether they want to be a player in this education hub or not. And they have, they do so much work. The bulk of their work happens over the summer. And so we granted them a little bit more time, with this kind of October 1st deadline, for them to kind of get their heads around what their intention is, and so that we can build that into the final report.
I see. Okay.
I didn't make that clear.
No,
I
no,
thank you for asking
did.
that question.
Well, I mean, made it clear that it wasn't available till October, but
But that's why.
leaving that Zoom presentation, I was thinking that we were seeing something in August and we're trying to regroup as a committee in August. So
Right.
that
That is.
explains.
And I think, and I'm comfortable with that piece of it. I mean, I'm excited about the Lakeside Labs potential. And so is Lakeside Labs. And so it allowed giving them a little bit of time to think about what their future looks like. And so that we can build that into this report, I think is important. So, and I'll just maybe key off and see if Jennifer Terry has anything to say on kind of broader cooperation too, but I happened to meet with John Norris, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting today at Polk County. There's so much happening in this space right now that is exciting. I mean, Polk County has set aside $1 million for water research and water quality efforts. They're still deciding how to spend that, and I'm sure that Jennifer is going to direct that in the right direction. But there's that's going on. There's the things that are going on here. I mean, I think there's so much interest in doing things in this space that we have to herd all the cats and get them going in the right direction, right? Is there anything you want to add on that?
No, not really.
Right, so I mean, it's fascinating and interesting, so.
So when you say the Polk County is still deciding, so there's no update based on the presentation that was made to them of all the funding, the different funding requests, that has still yet to be decided.
Not really. Now, the $1 million is set aside for water quality, but how it's going to be spent is undetermined. There was $250,000 that was discussed. They were going to set aside to help kind of fund some education efforts. That did not get set aside. The $250,000. That's not there. It's spent. And you know what? And this is the hard part. I think the part of the reason I want to continue to focus on what the education environmental hub idea would work at, because that's going to be bringing everybody that's working in the space together to collaborate. I mean, there's so many very good things that are going on right now. It seems that we need to do a good job of bringing all those things together. And that's what we really need to think about is how do we make the most of it? I mean, you think of the things that we're involved in, Ted, with, microsystem and the research that's going to be done. There's so much research and data that's going to be collected over the next 2-3 years. That's going to help to decide, drive better decision making and other things. We need to make sure those things are bundled and we're all sharing them and we're, and distributing them as widely as possible. And I think that's a good role for Waterworks to be the one that's the convener of those groups and make sure everybody's talking together. And makes Jen's plate fuller, but. So anyway, there's all that. I'm sorry to go on about that. Any questions about that work? I'll go quickly, Botanical Garden, exciting things going on at the garden. They've had a great summer. Their membership's at an all-time high. They've had more visitors than they've ever had. They have extremely ambitious plans for expanding the garden into the back acres, that will be wonderful and fantastic. And I just think there's a lot to watch there. But it's nice to know as we back out of our financial commitment, as we've agreed to do, they're filling those holes by doing all the work they need to do and bring people in and being financially sound. Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation.
So I'm actually gonna maybe turn to you guys. So one of the ongoing themes is this debt reduction payoff. That was also continued to be discussed at this meeting. I understand that there is a proposal that was drafted and it's sitting with the city or about to go to the city.
Park Foundation has it and is we drafted it. At Des
And
Moines
they're making
Waterworks.
edits
Their
to it.
Park Foundation will make edits to it, and then we'll take it to the city.
Join them to the city.
And I think we're there. It's what we discussed last time, and it basically allows for the Park Foundation to pay their debt to the city over a 30-year period. And that debt includes not only the construction costs for the tunnel, but also the depreciation that sits at the Greater Point Community Foundation. It allows them to pay that over time. The city is happy with that because this allows them everybody to move forward and allow the foundation to continue to move forward.
So I'll just also add, bringing to everyone's attention the innovation award that's coming up over Labor Day weekend. It's an opportunity to acknowledge an Iowan who has done great things in the area of innovation. This, if the individual's name escapes me and I apologize for that, but he was basically the ones that uncovered the damage that lead was doing in gasoline and apparently he's from Grinnell. So yeah, so I think that the Innovation Award is something that will continue to grow and bring more attention to the park and to Iowans. But right now it's the first one and it's being paired with the symphony that's going to be on Labor Day weekend. And then also exciting is the docuseries that's coming out in September. One of the freshwater is a document documentary, thank you. And the water quality, it started looking at the Great Lakes and they were actually looking at surfers on the Great Lakes. And then through those conversations evolved to the water quality challenges and opportunities. And it was also produced by Iowans that later relocated. So I encourage you all to check out that will start next month, I believe.
Those are gonna be presented at the amphitheater on a
Yes.
big screen. It's gonna be a kind of in-person event. Sounds pretty good.
With a panel discussion after. Yes.
Andrea, I have a question first for everyone who has spent the time working on this agreement with the city.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I think that's important. Many of us had calls from the mayor and like to get this taken care of. My question is making sure that we pay that back.
Mhm.
And I had a question specifically about the amphitheater program. It seems like that is really down, and when I looked ahead in their report on page 66. These are not the kind of groups that we really do see coming, these are kind of more local, doing ballet. A private
Right.
wedding. What are they doing? Because that appears to me to be a big, negative on their budget. Can you tell us what they're doing to that? Especially when we're going out of the nicest weather.
Sure. And I think that's at least that's a conversation that I've had a couple times with Sam of what's going on here. And working with their promoter and trying to secure bigger name acts that can commit to being at the park. I think that we've seen a few good opportunities roll off the park to another venue prematurely, with weather being the excuse. And I think that next year that's something that they're really going to have to dive into is how they would continue to work with that promoter and how many acts that can be guaranteed to ensure that there's going to be some funding that come off of those shows.
Am I right? They might even be exploring a different program.
I think so. Yeah, because this promoter, I think has a couple other irons in the fire of venues, and so I think that there's a conversation about is there another process, another opportunity to find and bring in shows. And I think the struggle there is the capacity of the foundation staff. They can't be the ones that do it. They need to figure out how to work with a third party to bring these shows in. And who do we have in the metro that can do that? And guarantee that we have, the amount of shows that we need to produce that revenue.
We did have a meeting this week with representatives from the Park Foundation. Mike and I met with Sam and Terry. And Matt Bentley still is the president. We asked that specific question. Their agreement with the promoter that they have been using has expired. So their plan is to do an RFP, and whether they end up with the same promoter or not will depend on the responses to the proposals that they receive. But if it is the same promoter, the anticipation or expectation is that there will be more shows. They will agree to that before they bring them on, because this year they didn't have enough shows to meet their obligation to the city. But we asked specifically this year, I would say they had two moneymakers. And they're hoping for somewhere between 8 and 12. And I remember we had a lot of discussion. We don't want this to be, every night sort of a venue. And there was a lot of discussion about how many shows is the right number of shows. And so we targeted that somewhere between 8 and 12. And the shows have to be of a certain size. They have to sell 2,500 to 3,000 tickets for it to be profitable. And so they're aware of that and they're working on that, and they intend to have a proposal from someone that brings them that kind of travel. That's the hope.
Your concern is well placed, Sue, and one of the parts of the agreement that's being worked out for the repayment to the city is that while these reports that we get from the Park Foundation are informative and helpful, that they also will provide some financial information to both us and to the city on an annual basis about donations, funding, and other things, so that we're all comfortable that we're having the information that your question goes to, and that is, are they financially sound and able to pay their debts and move forward?
Just the other big one that was the negative was the user vendor revenue. What is that? Because they had a budget for 48,000 and then they were showing zero. I assumed
right.
that was like food trucks and groups to support the,
It's connected to
groups
the
that they
concert,
would bring in.
right?
So that's basically they're saying.
They have a plan for food trucks and beer garden through the fall here that will support happen in conjunction with the docuseries. And I don't think they're planning to do that as part of the symphony. The symphony event is going to be big enough on its own. That's what I know.
Yeah, I think originally there was discussion about having vendors at these shows, but also having kind of a standing food truck contract, with a few food trucks to draw people to the park on a regular basis. And I haven't heard anything about that idea picking back up since COVID.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday in September, they're gonna have vendors in the park to try to test that concept.
Anything else on the park?
Okay.
All right, so you will see in your packet, I asked John Landy to draft a draft of a board policy for how Des Moines Waterworks selects and appoints members to the Central Iowa Water Regional Board. I thought we should give some time to think about this. What you see there is not, it's a draft. I just thought it would be helpful for us as a board to have a starting point. I don't know what the board's wishes are for next steps. I don't know if it makes sense to have this go to a committee for consideration, whether the board would like to maybe submit suggestions or edits to John, and then we could have it back on a board agenda. I'm really open to people's ideas about how we consider this policy. And you may not have even had time to read the whole thing through yet, but I had it inserted as an information item just so that I could get some direction about what the board's wishes were about how we consider this. And if we send it to a committee, which committee we send it to, and what the process should be. Anybody got some thoughts on that? I mean, my idea, I think it's important that we have a policy that suggests how we're going to make appointments, how we're going to how we remove people if we're going to do that. There's also a not so subtle reason for me bringing this up is that Moines Waterworks is considering how it's going to appoint members on a formal basis. And that way we're sending a signal to the rest of the communities that we're ready to appoint. So they need to be doing the same thing so that we don't get stalled after we sign the agreement with people saying, yeah, but we're not ready to appoint. They can take steps like this too. So part of it is public facing, but most of it's inward facing. Any thoughts about how we move forward with it? Is planning committee the right place for this to land?
Happy to have it.
I mean, maybe planning could have it on the agenda in September, and whether you can attend or not, maybe you could provide. If you have edits or suggestions, if John, if you're willing, that maybe people could send them to you. Between now and then, there's nothing in here that is, as I said, that anybody's fighting for. It's a standing, it's a starting point, so. If this could be written in a better way. For all ears.
So you're thinking, put it on the September 6th. planning commission.
I think that would make sense,
That's 2 weeks from today's.
you know, and if for some reason, we need more time. Maybe it could, if planning committee's not ready to do it on the 6th and it needs to go to the October meeting too, it could. But maybe we get it done in September, then have it back on our agenda, on the board agenda and for our September meeting.
I think it'd be interesting to also talk to some of the other larger utilities and see what they're thinking
Good idea.
before we adopt a policy, we reach out to them and say, how would you be selected?
Sure.
Not that it has to be consistent, but at least we would know what other people.
Well, that would help my secondary goal there, so that is to put it out there. We have some draft language, maybe you should get some draft language.
We've had some conversations with John and Jody about it and what they're thinking, but I think it'd be nice to formalize it and say, taking this to one of your committees, or what are you thinking about it
I like it.
before we,
Have they given any indication of what their thoughts are? And
very generally.
I don't know about, we're gonna have to think about, doing a policy on something that doesn't exist yet. And I know it's just a draft, but when we would formally vote on it, when we don't have a central Iowa Waterworks in existence, we can figure that out. But the other thing I wondered is if there's some pieces of this, maybe it doesn't go under the representation, but if we're, what kind of responsibilities back to the board, our representatives on the Central Iowa Waterworks would have in considering policy votes or whatever, just reporting or checking back with us on certain things.
That's very important. Maybe Andrew, I think wants to speak on that. We have talked about that a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit, but I was just gonna throw that to John to see is this a place to put it, or is that a separate, does it want
Yeah.
But
to put responsibilities of Central Iowa Waterworks board members to really ensure that their expectations are outlined and agreed upon entering that board.
Yeah.
I think that's critical, Diane, and how we do it. That's why I wanted to get this out there so we start thinking about it. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think this is probably the place for it under
No.
representation. But maybe we can take a broader look.
yep, I agree with you 100%. All right, well,
I
this is good. Let's start thinking about this.
John,
Oh, John,
Well, I was just gonna say, I think maybe the question you want to ask yourself is the people you put on the CIW board, how prescriptive are you as a board for their responsibilities? Are you appointing somebody who you trust will exercise their judgment in a particular way, or do you want to have more direct control
Mhm.
over that individual's actions on the CIWW board, in which case you would need to be more prescriptive about when they need to consult with you over certain things.
I had a comment, question. I'll discuss further later, but just note these, many comments that may be worth spelling out that representative on the Central Iowa Waterworks board may or may not be.
correct.
Mhm.
That it should be in there, but because they may or may not be. That's a
just
heavy
don't-
lift to
Don't
ask somebody.
preclude ourselves
Right.
from appointing one of our own board
Exactly.
members to serve on. And then the question was about the term. I think that's, maybe probably a good idea, but I was trying to think back, is that something that comes from the draft 2080 or what was that, just something we kind of thought of here?
It's something that I actually just suggested go in there just because, and it can be stricken if people don't feel that way. I would like to see a position like this turn over on a regular basis. And it would bother me to think that somebody might serve there for an extended period of time. Because you're getting farther and farther away from the people that we serve. And so I thought maybe a term limit protects that a little bit. But again, that's just up for discussion.
No, I think
Mhm.
probably a good idea as a strategy.
It's not,
Groups elsewhere.
And if we were to have a term limit, we may be different than anybody else who appoints members to Central Iowa Water Works. It'd be something that we might do and nobody else does. And maybe there's an upside and a downside to doing that. We need to think about it. All right, well, I appreciate this. It will go to the planning committee meeting and we can make some decisions on the 6th, whether that's enough time or we need more time or what we need to move it forward.
I don't think that would be enough time for us to then go to, West Des Moines, Urbandale before we become a board action.
Oh, and I think that's because I think Diane's got a good point. I think, here's the way I think it, that it can be talked about at the 6th. We can decide kind of what edits and suggestions there are to make it different. Then we could then shop an edited version of what you have today out to other communities to say, kind of, this is what we're discussing. Because to Diane's point, we may not be able to vote on this policy until after we actually sign the agreement with Central Iowa Water Works.
What I'm suggesting is we reverse that order and before we float a draft, we get input from them. To see how they're doing it. I mean, this is pretty, here's how we're gonna do it.
Sure.
And I'm concerned about that, Waterworks trying to take control of it. We've
I agree.
had all of these conversations for years. And I want to be very sensitive that we are forming this under different guidance and with regional input. When you roll out a policy and say, what do you think? And they're already responding to an awful lot of these. I just think our timing is off. I think it's great to discuss it, but I think we need to formally go back to the others and say, we've had any discussions and that may push it forward.
Yeah, can we still put it on the planning committee without thinking that we'll come to some kind of agreement or bring it back to our September
Yes.
board meeting, kind of as an open-ended, there's a place where we're gonna start talking about these things. Then we can say to the others, we're talking about it.
I like that idea, Diane, because I hadn't really thought about till you brought it up that we may not be able to vote on this until actually there is a Central Iowa Water Works anyway. And so I like what you're proposing, Diane, is that we can discuss it on September 6th planning committee meeting. Get some ideas about what our edits and things are gonna do. Between now and then, maybe Ted, you can find out from your colleagues if anybody else is thinking about these types of things and send a notice that we're beginning to think about it. And not shop it around quite yet, because Sue, you're right, to be a little sensitive, to look like we're not moving forward. And then, so it probably wouldn't come back to us in September, but maybe by our September meeting, the board meeting in September, we'll have a clearer idea of what the timing might be. For a lot of reasons. One, we might have a better idea about the timing of actually having an agreement and we might do this.
Amy and I continue to meet with Dale and Christina about every other week on some of the more detailed administrative issues. You can certainly put a question to them at that meeting. That would be a perfect opportunity just to see what they're thinking, what they might do, and then provide feedback.
Yeah, and let them know that we've got, that we're beginning to think about it ourselves.
Yeah, our next meeting is 6th or the 7th.
And
The
Diane,
6th.
when is our,
No, with West Des Moines and Urbandale.
Diane, I'm looking for our next meeting with John and Jody. I think it's that week of the 12th. Yes, the 13th is something.
Yeah,
Well, does that sounds acceptable to everybody? Appreciate it. Ted?
Um, three quick things from me, Graham. Just an FYI, budget review meetings are in full swing. I think we have 3 departments this week. We had a couple of departments last week. Great discussion always. There's a lot of detail that goes into our budget process. Every hour of time that's spent at the utility and every dollar that's spent on materials, equipment is accounted for in the budget in some way. Interesting development this year, chemical costs are up dramatically. To 50% over what they were just a year ago. Last year they were up significantly from the year before. So I still think a lot of that is related to transportation. We are working pretty hard with the transload facility, and they are working with Mississippi Lime. We're trying to get lime rail deliveries to the transload facility and then truck from there, which has potential for resulting in a smaller increase than if we continue to truck it all the way from St. Genevieve or wherever it comes from, Missouri. But we will be bringing a lot of budget discussions to the board here in the next 2 or 3 months, as we always do this time of year. From a production perspective, we did talk a little bit about it at finance and audit, but it does look like we are headed in the direction of our highest total production year ever, which would be the 3rd year in a row, I believe, that we had the highest total production year ever, which I think is representative of the growth as Metro, as Joel mentioned before. Interestingly enough, again, we did not set a record peak day. So our record peak day is still a day back in 2012. And even though we are producing more water in total, we're peaking a little less severely, or at least we have been for the last several years. It was high, it was right at 90 million gallons. But we've seen 90 million on a number of days in the past. It's the first time we've been at 90 for a while, but I attribute some of that to the messaging that we've done on social media and otherwise related to lawn watering, trying to schedule that, avoiding Mondays. But it does look like we will have our highest demand day. And then lastly, and I always hate to end on a sour note, but we have experienced 8 recordable injuries thus far this year. We've had a little bit of a rash in terms of injuries just here recently. A burn on an exhaust pipe on a pipe saw, and some things like that. Thankfully, nothing especially severe, but our target, try to stay at half or less of the national average for utilities our size. That's been our target for some time, which is 6, so we're above that now, which is not where we like to be, but it is what it is. I just want the board to be aware that we continue to work on safety and safety training, injury reduction. 8.
Ted, as you going back to the peak usage, as you plan and your team plans for the future, and you talk to, your colleagues around the country about the change in environment, this summer is remarkable in a place like Dallas, who's gone through a long-term, drought, then all of a sudden has one of its worst flooding events. It gets a year's worth of rain in a day. I mean, that's likely to be our future. And so how are you, and I've answered the question. I'm just curious to know if you're developing a plan and working with others about these changing patterns and being prepared to go from drought to flood in a day, like Dallas.
Yeah, we haven't talked about it enough, Graham. Frankly, there's been conversation about it. Jen, in fact, talks to me about monthly about the fact to have a climate action plan. That's something that is becoming a reality in the industry as everybody's looking at climate change. What does that mean? what does it mean for us? And does it mean that we can expect to go from drought to flood in a day? Does it mean that we can expect, numerous years in a row of drought? It's hard to know what it means to expect. And then once you decide what you're going to expect, it's hard to plan for a flood, if you will, in the middle.
Right.
It's kind of what has happened in a number of places this year, Death Valley. I
Right.
don't know if you saw the pictures of the cars that were just buried in the parking lot at Death Valley from a freak rainstorm in a place where it never rains. There's been a few of those examples, and so my answer to you, Graham, is honest, and that is we haven't done enough to plan, but it's on our radar. That's something that we need to talk more about.
Well, I'll be interested to see as you guys put your heads together, what you hear from others about planning for that, because, as we move forward with regionalization, and there's gonna be others at the table, we need to hand them a roadmap as best we can for the future. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
Which is a roadmap to, where at this point, when it comes to that.
We
stuff.
don't. EPA is actually offering a program now, like a climate resiliency program that utilities can participate in. I think that's something we probably need to look into. What is that? They help, but it's almost an exercise in imagining unimaginable. Trying to prepare. We've had
But
good
I-
experience the last couple of years.
Right.
But I mean, some of that's things that we're investing in now. I mean, that is the storage of water, whether it's through ASRs or others, so that we have, water on hand, and we're not as reliant on what comes down the river. Some of it's things we're doing anyway, but
Some of it, but some of the extremes, it's interesting to me to know that in the Southwest, if you look at Lake Mead and Las Vegas, and their situation where they have literally decades of water in storage, and they keep drawing it down and drawing it down. And they're starting to worry about it
Right.
now. Possibility of the level getting so low that they can't produce electricity through electric. We don't have years worth of storage even in Sailorville. If we had an extreme drought, we don't have the kind of years worth of storage that they have. So what are the other options? Well, our option historically has always been, well, we'll disallow lawn watering, irrigation, and reduce our demand, our peak demands dramatically. But the time has likely come for a longer term plan.
Have we looked into having a climate study? I mean, we're having a really high year in production, could be a little excess revenue. Talked about what you said, being able to hand out the roadmap. If we're gonna do a climate study, wouldn't this be the time to do it?
Well, I think this fits into what we've talked about before, and that is looking at efficiency. Measures would certainly be a piece of dealing with what we think's gonna happen under climate. There are a lot of climate studies that you can look at out there, and there's a lot of climate studies that pertain to this part of the country that have been done on what we expect to see in degree day increases and again, the flooding and the drought situations. But I think it's a broader piece and may include that efficiency that we were talking about taking a look at.
Is that something maybe we could ask to have come back to planning? Because certainly with all the studies like Diane's saying, they wouldn't have to start from scratch, but to take that and apply it to what it means to a utility.
To get that action plan decided. So more than just a study, but the next step.
Mhm, mhm.
The national associations have certainly done some.
Yeah.
work. There's a climate change handbook. There are things out there that we can certainly look at. The other thing that occurs to me is it's something that it's not, it can't be the Des Moines Waterworks plan. It has to be a regional plan. Our demand is really driven by the regional partners today.
Mhm.
This is the seasonal demand is really driven by the regional partners, and they're gonna have to be a part of that. May want to have some sensitivity to developing a plan and handing it to them. We're gonna need to involve them too.
Right.
We can certainly look into the pathway that we think should be followed by the region to develop a climate action plan.
Well, I'm gonna be interested, well, those numbers that you talked about this summer and our peak usage this summer, as you guys continue to crunch those numbers, I think there's gonna be some interesting things there. I mean, there's growth. And there's also gonna be a pattern of what our peak days were. I mean, maybe we didn't have one particular day, there was a lot of usage, but how that usage was spread out over the summer. That could be a changing pattern as well. Not that one season can indicate a pattern, obviously, but
Right.
as you guys crunch those numbers, put these numbers into what's happened over the last 10 years, I think you're gonna find out some interesting things, and that will be interesting.
And the other thing is that we've been influencing these patterns because we've been pretty
Absolutely.
aggressively messaging to people. Don't water your grass on Mondays, spread it out. And I do think that people are hearing that. It's difficult to know. Then when you layer in there on top of lawn watering, there's also fairly significant cooling load if we get above about 90 degrees. I think that's what we saw in Altoona this year when there was a lot of water from us is that it got very hot, outdoor temperatures. So Facebook is likely cool. They're going to try to understand that. Is that what caused them to use water from us and in fact exceed their purchase capacity? Because water that was from us. We had extended periods of time when the temperature was over 90 degrees. We had a period of time there, 2 weeks, almost every day, the high was over 90.
Right.
So there are a lot of questions there.
I think this is where our value add, this utility comes into the region.
Absolutely.
If we say, we're looking at doing this, we'd love you to be part of the study. Here's the scope we're thinking of, what are we not thinking of? I mean, to start to have those conversations now and operate like we're a regional entity, I think that's the value of what we're all trying to do.
And to start asking those questions, as I say, as we hand this off,
Yes.
so that, nobody's starting from scratch here, but we've begun a process and we hand it off to the regional entity.
There's a little bit of urgency in doing this type of work, because I think that this summer has really driven home how much impact the climate is going to have on our specific work. And I am worried that the region is gonna have a lot of other things on their to-do list. So if we can jumpstart this, that would be putting us a little bit further down the road and actually having a usable action plan when we need it.
They're also having good years.
Mhm.
So
Right.
another reason, I mean, they're selling a lot of water, so. Maybe a study that we all want to contribute to, please ask.
And we bring something very valuable to the table, and that's the historical record of what's happened. And so, anyway, I don't mean to belabor this point, but Ted, I think what you're hearing from this board is however you would like to move forward with this. If at some point you want to bring something to the planning committee, to begin to think about. If it's up to you, it's telling us to be done soon, but It's there.
I think it needs to be something to look at in the near term.
it's great.
I think it's something Jen can use when she's talking to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think to Andrew's point, a study would be certainly required and great, but the action plan, I think is the real valuable. Of the plan. You think of how valuable it would have been if we had something, if there was a specific emergency action plan for a pandemic. And we had it, but so how
Right.
much, you wouldn't have followed it to a T, but how much easier that would make your life. So,
We had a contagious disease response plan in existence. And we used it as a guide, but wow, did we ever learn a lot during the early days of the pandemic. And, but at least we had a
have something to
guideline.
reference.
Yeah, we did have a guide.
I didn't mean to hijack the discussion, but I thought.
No,
that was important.
that's
The only other thing, that was on your list, the contract status and professional service agreements are attached. You talked about the injuries. Are there any other items that I've missed or anything that people would like to discuss today?
I just wanted to note that CBS Sunday Morning did a whole piece on PFAS. This past Sunday, and so, you know, that awareness of PFAS is getting out there. It's very, very, very widespread. Finding PFAS in water without having a really good understanding of the impacts of it. I think I didn't get that from the story.
Saw something today about an article in the New York Times about a new technology that's.
Yeah, I read
Right.
this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I haven't read the article, but I
It's
saw.
all science.
Yeah, but it's a technology that possibly they're coming up with a way to break PFAS down. But it's still being tested, but,
Will it break it down into something that's
or, hey, who knows,
not
right?
harmful?
Right.
Yeah,
Create something worse.
Right. Right. And Kyle just reminded me too, I sent an email out this morning about the
Oh.
open house at the Northwest 26th booster station, the Polk City booster station. I forwarded an email that Rachel had sent to the folks in Polk City, which you don't need to try to respond to Rachel by last Friday, which was at the bottom of that email, then I neglected to delete that, I'm sorry. But you're all cordially invited to attend that open house if you want. It's a great opportunity to see one of our facilities kind of up close and personal. It's a little bit of a drive here. Kind of about, it's just north of the Sailorville treatment plant over there, kind of west of Aiken, but it's a neat little facility that our folks did a nice job of kind of blending it into the neighborhood there. It's a house, thinks it's a house, and that's kind of what we want. And I hope that the folks from Polk City will be there. They funded the majority of the construction. We did participate to some extent, to the extent that we're going to use it to serve unincorporated county areas. But it's an eagle facility. We have opportunity to stop out there.
Well, all right, hearing nothing else, I believe we are adjourned for the day. Thanks, everybody.